Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar on fresh approaches to digital patient recruitment campaigns. In this webinar today, we're going to talk about the digital transformation that patient recruitment for clinical trials is going through and some insight, pointers and tips on how to help maximize those digital patient recruitment campaigns. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I just wanted to give you some background into Welocalize and who we are as a business. Welocalize, we're a global language services organization with over 20 years experience in the life science space. Many of our clients are clinical research organizations, pharmaceutical organizations, and patient recruitment organizations themselves. And we ourselves as a business are seeing a change in the way patients are accessing information for clinical trials. We're coming across a lot of content in many different language combinations, which is intended for the digital space. And we're looking to work with our clients in how we can help them maximize the content that they have for intention to use for patient recruitment campaigns. This is done with a mix of our in-house experts from a life science perspective in content localization, but also with our colleagues in our digital marketing division. We currently have over 120 digital marketing experts and specialists that help us maximize this content for our clients for digital patient recruitment. And my colleagues Hugh and Mike are going to be talking through various different aspects of this throughout this presentation. So what you're going to get out of this presentation and the key takeaways, we're going to talk about the digital transformation of patient recruitment with regards to clinical trials, talk about how you can maximize and navigate various different digital advertising platforms, understanding and maximizing digital recruitment campaigns, and then lastly, some cultural and language factors for advertising and recruitment that you should take into consideration when building your campaigns. At this stage, I'm just going to hand over to Hugh and Mike just to introduce themselves. Over to you guys.
Hi, my name's Hugh. I'm the Senior Solutions Director at Welocalize. I've spent the last 12 years working in digital marketing. 3 of those years, the last previous years, helping to run the Adapt part of Welocalize that Mike's going to speak to in a minute. I'm very interested in how digital marketing can help revolutionize industries, and we really think that there's an opportunity here with the way that things are going with clinical trials for that to be the case with this industry as well.
And hi everyone, I'm Mike Sharp. I'm the Paid Media Director at Adapt. I've also worked in the industry for about 12 years as well, primarily in the paid side. And to give you an introduction to Adapt, so we are Welocalize's digital marketing agency. We do international multilingual performance marketing for many brands across many different countries in many different languages. We cover the 4 sort of core areas that you can see on the screen there, from the multilingual SEO and content, the paid digital advertising, which is what we'll be focusing on today, as well as then the conversion optimization and analytics side. As an agency, we've got all of the badges, qualifications and accreditations that you would expect us to have, from being Google Premier Partners all the way across the bottom there you can see to being a Facebook marketing partner as well.
So Mike and I are going to be talking about how, to give you some context around this, how we think there feels like there's a growing consensus in the patient recruitment industry that the future efficiency of the industry will be found through effectively delivering patient acquisition, engagement, and trial completion, starting that with digital marketing, and how that potentially can be delivered at an international level. Mike will cover off broadly the principles of the effectiveness of digital advertising, and I'll try and bring in focus around things around the linguistic, cultural, and creative aspects of that. I think, to give you a bit more background as well, myself and Alex in the last 12 months have had more conversations than ever with peers of yourselves and ourselves in the in the patient recruitment industry, and it feels like there's an incredible amount of focus and opportunity, relevance building up to the topic that we're going to be going through. We all know stories of other industries that have been revolutionized by digital marketing. You take something like travel, for example, how that's moved from the high street onto digital only, sort of the idea of going down, well, especially at the moment, the idea of going down a main street or a high street and booking a holiday at a travel agency sounds very, very old-fashioned. We believe there's an opportunity here with patient recruitment for digital marketing, proven the same way. And I think that what we've really seen with the impact of COVID is that moving on to when we're in a potentially a post or less COVID world, there'll still be a huge important role for digital marketing to play, and the non-face-to-face marketing in this industry and all others as well.
Thanks, Hugh.
Mike.
So I was going to say today we're going to cover off some of the basic principles that apply to advertising, and I think in lead generation, and specifically even more so within clinical trial recruitment, one of the key things that we need to focus on is what's on the screen now, the mantra of getting the right people with the right message at the right time. It's something that Google used to refer to as micro moments. And essentially what that means is then to have effective advertising, we need to make sure that the ads we show people are personally useful, but also immediately actionable. And so what I'm going to cover off today is an insight into how we go about that broadly, and then with some examples of how that focuses on the clinical trial recruitment space. The way we do it is with a framework. We all have frameworks. We use one that's called the 4A's framework. It's something that was introduced by Google a number of years ago. And I appreciate I've referenced Google a couple of times, but just to give some context around that, we are a significant partner of Google's, and we buy around $80 million of international multilingual advertising with them each year on behalf of our clients. And the way the 4A's framework works is it's those 4A's you can see at the bottom. We've got assets, which are the things that we build and put in front of customers. We've got the target audience, which is who we want to put those things in front of, so where they are, what device they're using. We've then got attribution, which is just a way of understanding and measuring the effectiveness of the advertising that we're doing in a more holistic sense. And then we have what used to be a dirty word of automation, which is about how do we scale up that advertising using everything that's there. So if we drill into the first one, so we've got assets first. And what we're talking about there really is the building blocks, the fundamentals of the advertising. So it's the keywords that we're using to identify users. It's the text-based ads, the image ads, the videos that you may see on YouTube. It's the creatives and the ads that you may see on Facebook and things like that. All of those elements. And if we start off with search as the first example, so within search, and again, within most advertising, we ask this kind of question, which is how can we make this specific search as efficient and effective as possible? And the answer has been the same for the last 12 years or so that I've done it, which is that relevancy really is the king. So if we take this example, you can see on the left, this is a standard paid search ad. It's something that you will probably have seen on Google. You may or may not have noticed the little ad symbol there, which denotes it as being an ad rather than one of the organic listings. And what we've got here is someone who searched very specifically for UK paid clinical trials. Now we need to make sure that we show them a hyper relevant ad that's specific to what they've searched for. So in this case, this example that we've picked, you can see. We also need to make sure that we then show them what to do next effectively. So in this example, from a relevancy perspective, we're matching what they've searched for. We're showing them, it says healthy and aged 18 to 45. So we assume that the targeting has been done in such a way to hit those people. And if we break it down into the three parties that are involved here, we've got Google, we've got the advertiser, and we've got the user. And from Google's perspective, they want to show a good user experience. So the relevancy there is that, for people to come back and use Google again and again and again, when they search for something, it needs to be a relevant ad. And I think everyone has been in a situation where they see an irrelevant ad and it's infuriating. So from that perspective, Google only get paid in this kind of relationship with the advertiser when the user clicks on that ad. The advertiser equally are paying for someone to go through to their site. So they want to make sure that this ad is as relevant to that user as possible to minimize any kind of wastage in terms of getting the wrong person to the site. And then finally, from a user's perspective, they want the most relevant result back to them. And they want it first time. They don't want to have to keep searching to find it. And if we get that right, it becomes a virtuous circle where all of those three parties benefit. And this is the same in this example as it would be if we then scale it up across. So I mentioned we do the multilingual advertising as well. And scaling this up across other markets is a very challenging thing to do, but it's something that we do. It's our bread and butter at Adapt, and it's something that if you get the planning right and you do it carefully, it's something that really can be done at scale. But also, we know that nuances exist, and Hugh will talk to some of those in a moment. But this is where one of the keys is working with linguists who understand those nuances, but also understand the core principles of search. And as I say, that's what we do at Adapt. And done right, it really is a powerful way of scaling that kind of work. One of the key things that everyone, I'm sure, who's watching this will appreciate is the importance that compliance plays in this whole equation. And that's not only from a client side compliance, but also from the media owners. So we have to be mindful of the sensitivities around some of the policies that are in place. And for example, Google has a very specific clinical trial recruitment policy that you can see top left there, which says that, it says it can be done, but only in certain markets. And we can't say or promote certain things, like we can't promote prescription drug trials, we can't imply safety or anything like that. The other side of that is then, and this is the same for Facebook, it's the same for Microsoft and for Google, is that we can't effectively imply knowledge of someone's personal attributes, which means we can't call out that we know that you are a man, or we can't call out that we know your particular race or religion or anything like that. So there is a whole art around being able to do effective advertising whilst staying within these compliance rules. And it's something that again, we're very familiar with, and we have very strong relationships with the likes of Facebook and Google, which allows us to work with them to make sure that there aren't any delays to getting things through the process and getting them live.
Mike, just a quick question here. Obviously here you've talked a lot about how we're being compliant from a platform perspective, but how do we help our clients be compliant from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, great question. So it's all about just building it into the workflow. So as I mentioned, we're very comfortable with working on compliance both sides, and it's about making sure that we allow time for that. So it's working with a client to understand what can be done or can be said and what can't be said, but then also making sure that we allow for that within the creation process. So if we know that a client requires 3 to 4 weeks to get something through compliance, for example, we can build that into the timeframes in which we're building and getting stuff live. And it's also just about building up that relationship with the client as well. With clients we've worked with a long time, we tend to start to understand what those regulations are, and we work with experts and linguists who are capable of understanding those compliance needs as well, which means that over time they will still get signed off by the client each time, but it'll happen quicker and quicker as we go through.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So we've, once we've spent time building that ad and understanding how to get, people through, one of the worst things we can then do is deliver people to a bad website. And, it's one of those things that's frustrating if we can spend a lot of money on a single click to get someone through because of how relevant they are. you know, if we get them through to a page which they immediately bounce from, the impact of that on the user is felt, or is felt not just on the user in terms of bad user experience, but also it can be felt on the bottom line, in the sense that Google will take note now. Bing are the same, Facebook is starting to do this, where if they can measure that if someone has bounced from a website immediately, if we go back to that relevancy mantra, you know, Google realizes that person has had a bad user experience, so maybe that website isn't as relevant as they thought. And that means that actually next time we can potentially pay more to drive a similar user through. So there is benefit in terms of cost in actually, you know, getting this right. And what you can see here is a very simplified look at a sort of landing page critique that we do at Adapt. And what we do is take those 6 core areas of relevancy, simplicity, USPs, clutter, reassurance, and incentive. And then the team in the conversion side will go through and then just ask it. And I've pulled out a few questions here to illustrate. So things like relevancy is a really good one. So you can see the top is an example of an ad here for a client. And what we're looking for is there a jar between what they see on the website versus what they've actually clicked on? I think, again, we've all probably been there, where you click through on something and you think, actually, did I miss the ad I was meant to click on, because it just doesn't fit. It doesn't feel like the same kind of language is being used. So there's that kind of relevancy that pulls through. Simplicity might just be, you know, is the page, you know, do we know what we actually want the user to do? Is it clear from when they land what they should do next? Is the call to action clear enough? If there are multiple calls to action, how are we making sure that we get them through to the right one? Things like that. USPs, I think, is a fairly self-explanatory one, but it's making sure we call them out. Is the page too cluttered? Is there too much there? You know, if you think about, you know, we're in a mobile first world now, and we only have a few seconds each time someone lands on a page to grab them. If they can't see the wood for the trees effectively, then that's a bad user experience. Reassurance, again, in this space, with sort of clinical trials, that reassurance might be even more key. And it's about evidence. You know, it's from a retail world, it's those positive reviews on sales. It's making sure that people see that other people have converted and had a good user experience. And then incentive is, you know, is there an obvious reason why they should make that conversion now versus potentially holding off and doing it later? And we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of conversion rates, but, you know, all of these things will work together to make sure that, you know, the valuable traffic we're sending is as sticky as possible. It does what we want it to do when they get there. And one of the things we're offering for people watching this is if anyone would like a free conversion review, then please do get in touch, and we can have our conversion experts run over your site for you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to talk a bit more about broadening this out into things that Mike's talked a lot about, which is building out for relevancy. One of the most important things to consider when approaching essentially a paid search program for patient recruitment is the relevancy of the platforms that you might be using. So if you're looking to create individual assets, and we're going to go through an example of how those differ for Naver and Google, the other consideration is also around which platforms to use. This data is already out of date. So this data is from probably about 9 months ago. It's out of date already. Even the concept of search engines is changing. I'll give you an example. In East Asia, social network and social platforms are used predominantly over search, whereas in the Western Hemisphere, companies like Google completely dominate any kind of web interactions. The other consideration here is as well, and how these will continue to dynamically change, is the likelihood of Apple creating a search engine in the near future, in the next 2 years, to rival Google and to take away that that dominance of mobile search in particular, especially through the iPhone and the iPad. So that's something else to look out for. So what we're thinking about here is you're looking to work with partners who really understand how these things, how these factors will be changing, and how dynamic those shifts are. The next slide is we can just have a look as an example of how ad creation differs in English. In English, you have things, and Mike is an expert on this. I think I've got this vaguely right, around 3 times the headlines, two types of descriptions and two options around display URL paths, which are the URLs that you get to put onto a paid search ad that don't actually match the actual URL, but just to give an idea to the potential user about where they're clicking. Now those just go out the window, even if you're still thinking that you're going to be buying a search ad on something like Naver in Korea. Those things you're building out don't respond at all. Don't correspond at all with how things are done in South Korea. That's one example. Then if you think about the previous slide, take that out into lots of different search engines across the globe, you need to start thinking about how to build out that capability and that expertise of looking at different platforms in order to deliver your patient recruitment search ads. As I alluded to previously, another consideration around relevancy is thinking about social media networks and how local they can be. 12 years ago, social media networks were much more diverse than they are now. There are signs that there are signs that is getting even more diverse now. That the diversiveness is coming back. An example here being the elephant in the room that is not on this slide, again, because this slide is about 9 months old, is TikTok. So TikTok is now becoming a very much not a dominant player, but a significant player, and crucially internationally. So if you think about something like Twitter being specific to certain locales, markets, something like Facebook being unused in certain areas of the developing world, TikTok seems to have a universal usage, which is very, very interesting from a social media point of view. Another example there is a company called, I believe it's pronounced Ding, hope it is, a German company, a German equivalent of LinkedIn. If you're looking to do any B2B work in Germany, then you'll definitely know what Ding is. Globally, that is very much a kind of DACH market specific platform that would have no relevance in other markets. So this slide is again trying to think about how you can create relevancy based on the social media networks that you'll be approaching to run your paid social recruitment ads. And this slide is talking about how you focus on different resources. So when we're talking about resources, what we mean is how do we find in-market partners who understand marketing, which lots of things that Mike's talked about previously. So messaging, how do you convey a specific message in that specific locale, but also understand the platforms. How does, for example, the one we showed you before, how does Naver run their search ads versus how does Google run their search ads? How can you find partners that understand those things as well? And then also background in the sector. How can you look to sort of evaluate someone's ability to understand how patient recruitment works, how they have as much experience as yourselves or someone else when you're looking to partner with them. So if you're thinking about those considerations when you're selecting, recruiting a partner or a linguist in market, the next stage is then to run onboarding and training. So onboarding and training is to ensure that who you found is indeed able to convey the message of your business and your brand, your tone of voice, and how you want to appear to specific customers in your industry. And then it's about retaining and engaging that talent to ensure that they will continue to work with you, how to incentivize them to continue to deliver fantastic work for your specific business. Again, these are things that we can deliver at scale. We're very, very comfortable in those in that environment. That's how we've been able to scale our business so far. Okay, we're now talking about how assets differ from a traditional linear localization workflow. So a traditional linear localization workflow would be going from source to target with a translation in the middle, and maybe an extra step to check the quality of that translation. That's very different when it comes to digital marketing, and it should be very different when you're thinking about patient recruitment digital marketing. So this is very much a pictorial example of how those different considerations work. But if you think about A/B testing, the concept of A/B testing is what Google, Facebook, and all the other platforms that we've spoken about before really focus on, testing as many different messages and combinations of messages, combinations of display URLs, combinations of keywords, combinations of images that you can build out to create the type of advert that will deliver the most amount of goals you're specific to things. So the most amount of signups or the most amount of completions, those kind of considerations. So when you need to think about workflows associated to digital marketing and specifically around ads, please bear in mind the fact that you need to be creating different versions of different media in order to deliver that sort of optimized opportunity in adverts.
Cool, thanks, Hugh. So when we're looking back then, so we've got our assets, we understand the keywords we need to be targeting. We've gone through the process of creating those ads. We've accounted for compliance. We've accounted for different nuances of location and platform. And the next day is then to really dig into the audience. So it's about understanding, as I said earlier, who we want to target and how do we get at them. Now, obviously, planning for the right audience is crucial, and probably no more. It's never more crucial than it is in something like clinical trials, because we want to make sure we're targeting the right participants that you guys want. And the benefit of digital media now is that the targeting is incredible in terms of how much detail we can go into. So there's always been things like gender, age, and location available. And this is being added to almost on a monthly basis by each of the platforms with things like we can target based on wealth and affluence. We've got in-market targeting, which is based on people's recent intent. So if you've been looking for particular things over and over again, we can target you based on that. If you have an affinity to a particular thing, so if it's something you're passionate about, and this is again defined by the platforms based on groups you're members of in Facebook or searches you've made on Google, that they all become bucketable, as we would say, and targetable. And then there are things that are probably more pertinent to this industry, which are things like major life events. So whether it's, the recent birth of a child, whether it's moving, whether it's graduating from high school and things like that. All of these things allow us to then be really specific and target right down to an incredible level. And obviously, we've got to be careful we don't go too granular and too specific. We need to make sure we allowed for those audiences to be built at scale. And this is where the platforms really come into their own, because what we can then do is we can start with a broad list, and then we can segment it down, and we can look at within each of the audiences, we can see different groups within it. So we may have different based on age and gender within the overall group that we have. And that allows us to then go back to that relevancy point, and it means we can tailor those ads. So as Hugh said, we may test different types of ad copy versus different age groups, or, for a very simplistic example. But it helps to just always going back to that mantra of the right ad for the right person at the right time.
Mike, all this targeting sounds very interesting and beneficial for a lot of markets, but how does it really relate to recruiting a patient for a clinical trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if we go back on some, so it could be as simple as the different age demographic targeting that we can do. So I don't think people realize necessarily how much information you give away to the likes of Google or Facebook just to sign up for the platform with Google, or if you're signed into your Android phone, it understands everything about you. So it could be, just being able to target someone in a particular age range or a particular gender, or even it may be the major life events. So if we're trying to target people that we know have been pregnant in the last 12 months or something like that, there's very specifics we can go into that would be really valuable for different trials.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other considerations to take it out again to an international level are things around cultural sensitivity. So what could possibly join up the Bermudan flag, a heavily tattooed and pierced man, and crown in Poland? Well, I'll explain. The first one is around aesthetics. So a really good example of this is some of the work we've done previously when a client of ours was asked us to evaluate specific colors in different countries and how they're perceived. And the one I always remember, hopefully correctly remember, is that the color silver is quite a negative color in Bermuda, something you don't really want to aspire to. Unlike, I'd love to be, I love silver, I love gold. Whereas if I was Bermudan, I probably wouldn't associate such a positive aspect to silver. So that's a consideration when you're creating your brand and creating your adverts in those markets. Something else to consider is around aesthetics. The second one is around imagery, slightly different. This example relates to Mexico. There's nothing that you can do more to turn off a potential Mexican customer than include someone who's got a lot of piercings on them. That's seen as definitely a negative connotations in Mexico. I would suggest that piercings in Western Europe and America is something of a revival. It's seen as quite a positive attribute when it regards to imagery. It's generally linked to a youthful audience who has disposable income and is quite sort of something to aspire to. That is certainly not the case in among our friends in Mexico. The third example, slightly more topical, these are all quite topical, is around the Crown. And we were working with a music streaming service who was looking to develop playlists specifically around the concept of the crown. Who wears the crown? Unfortunately, unbeknownst to them, or fortunately enough because they work with us, we were able to spot that actually crown, among lots of different languages, translates as corona in Polish. So something to consider before you begin naming and sloganing your brand new products in those markets. So those things are always part of the process of internationalizing your advertising, your digital marketing advertising, around being careful around aesthetics, imagery, and slogans.
Thanks, Hugh. And then, so we've got the assets in place. We've then understood who the target audience is. So we've done that work with the client to identify the audience we want. We've used the techniques that are available to us within the platforms to then go after those people as efficiently as possible. And the next one is then to understand the attribution. And attribution, as I said, is a way of measuring how successful different elements of our advertising is. This is a very famous quote that's attributed to about 10 different people. And it's something that, used to be very pertinent when we look back at times in TV. And I think if we use an old school example, so if we go back maybe 20 years or so, if we were trying to recruit for a trial 50 or 60-year-old men who were smokers within a 30-minute drive time of a particular center, we may opt for things like outdoor posters at bus stops, localized TV and radio, maybe some flyers in doctor's surgeries or out on the streets, things like that. And that's when this kind of quote becomes much more of a reality, which is, all of those things will probably lead to a successful campaign. But what we don't necessarily know is exactly which one is the driver, which one is crucial, which one, is just surplus to requirements. And the benefits now with digital is that this should very much be a thing of the past. And if we stick with a similar kind of example, rather than having to put the ad on the bus stop with the revolution that's happened with mobiles, where everyone is on mobiles pretty much all the time, rather than having to assume they've walked past and seen that ad at the bus stop, we can actually target them when they're in that location on their mobile phone. We can hit them with ads on their mobile phone at home, when they're commuting to work, when they're in and around that location. We can keep that targeting of the sort of 30-minute drive, that all of that's still achievable. But the key thing now is that we can measure exactly who has seen our ads. We can see what device they've seen those ads on, which particular version of an ad, if we're testing multiples, that they've clicked on. And then more importantly, we can then see what they're doing afterwards, and we can see what they go on to do or not, if that's the case. And this is a slightly intimidating looking slide, but what this is then, this just represents how complicated attribution can be. So across, if we take a customer's first interaction to them signing up and taking part in a trial, we could have lots of different touch points that we hit them with. So, from things like display ads, which are the banner ads that you'll see on different websites, podcasts, all of those kind of things are very much designed to get someone's attention in a sort of first glance. And the simplest way to think about attribution is if we have a conversion rate, so of 100 people who come to the site, if 5 of them convert and do what we want them to, that's a 5% conversion rate. And that's actually, depending on the industry, that's something that would be quite good. But equally, if you flip that on its head, that means that 95 of those people have not done what we wanted to do. But that doesn't immediately mean that that's a failure. And this is where attribution is king, because it's about understanding of those, those who don't convert immediately, what do they go on to do? And if we go to take podcasts as an example, it's unlikely that if a user hears about a trial on a podcast for the first time, that they're immediately going to then go to the website and sign up. It may take them a number of days or a number of weeks to go back. That might be the first time they've heard of you as a brand, and they need to do a bit more searching and a bit more interaction to understand, what they're signing up for. If we were to then look at paid search, so if someone searches for your brand on Google, they are much more likely to convert then, but that doesn't necessarily account for all of the work that's happened behind the scenes with the other channels. So what we're doing effectively is we're trying to identify, with that podcast example, how much more do we need to spend on podcasts in order to improve the overall number of conversions. And once we understand that for all of these different touch points, we can then start to adjust the spend and to just tweak it here and there, ultimately with the goal of being able to scale up the volumes that we need to deliver people to those trials as efficiently as possible. By cutting, the ultimate question is, by cutting out podcasts, does that make a difference, for example? And all of this helps us to understand that, so that that ultimately we can get more users through. It sounds hideously complicated, and it can be, but we do have ways of helping to alleviate that pain. And this is a really good example of one of the things that we do for clients as standard, which is a Google Data Studio report. And what this does is it allows us to take those different signals in and then output a report like the one you can see there. It's just an example one, but it allows us to take very complicated data and then distill it into a very readable format. And it's, this would be based on the KPI. So we may have different measures of success. It may be signups. It may be people who've engaged with particular content. We can track all of that in here. And one of the key things is that it is real-time reporting. So gone should be the days of having to wait till the end of the month to get a report, or the end of a campaign to get a look back report over the last 3 months. This allows us to make those decisions about different channels and different touch points in real time, that then helps to just keep pushing performance on. And again, making sure that we're, buying media on different channels as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And then finally, we come to automation. So we have our assets planned and created. We understand the audience that we're targeting and where to get at them. We know what is working and which channels are contributing to driving those successful applicants. And the last step is then automation. And 10 years ago, automation that people like Google offered from a marketing perspective wasn't up to scratch. And there's always the fear with automation that they can't do it as good as a human. Whereas I think nowadays, all of the different platforms have their own algorithms. Google boasts, it seems to get bigger every time I read the stat, but it's something like 80,000 signals in the blink of an eye that it can identify based on a user, and stuff that, frankly, as an advertiser, as a human advertiser, I can't keep up with. So automation is the way that then allows us to give the scale and effectively the next step. So we've got the foundation in the first 3 A's nailed. We then layer on automation, which just lets us take it up and up and up and boost that advertising to the next level. So gone are the days of it being a feared thing, and it's anyone who isn't now heavily invested in terms of using automation within their marketing campaigns is definitely 100% at a disadvantage. So hopefully that gives a bit of an insight into the forays as we use it. Obviously happy to discuss more with anyone, and please do get in touch.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Hugh. That was very, very insightful. Thanks also to the audience. It's very much appreciated. We hope that you found this information also insightful, and that you had some takeaways that you can apply to your future engagement with current or future patients that you're trying to recruit. I put these details in the chat section of the presentation earlier today, but they're on the screen here as well if you'd like to carry on the conversation with us, if you have any follow-up questions that you didn't ask during the presentation. And just a couple of things to mention at the bottom. As a follow-up to this presentation, we are looking to offer a free landing page review for your next recruitment campaign. And then also, if you're looking to actually start the process on digital transformation for your patient recruitment, we are also offering reduced rates for your first campaigns with Welocalize. As I said, the details are here on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing from you. But thanks again for listening in. It was great talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.